In this one, I'm going to show you 5 more advanced lighting tricks in Blender that you probably didn't know. The first one is using image textures inside of the actual lights to create really interesting colors and highlights and just get some crazy looking results with the lighting that you just wouldn't expect. The second one is using fake caustics, kind of a similar technique, but a different application of it. Third one is using lighting gobos to kind of save an otherwise boring and flat lighting situation. So I'll use this when there's like, I like the lighting, but it's just too boring. I'll use this trick. It's really easy. And then the fourth one is using God rays and how to get that reliably to work every single time. And the fifth one is using the light fall off node to get actually a gradient fall off of a different color so that it could like start off as red and then fall off to blue as it moves further from the light. And I'll show you an example of how I use that in client work and an actual render. And I'll also show you like combining these different techniques in multiple different ways and how I'm doing that as well. So let's get started with number one. Okay, so let's just get started on the first one. So this setup right here is what I want to talk about, which is, if I just sort of show you what's going on here, we have this very interesting sort of setup with kind of like, it almost looks like something is refracting through something else, and that's what's creating the lighting. What is going on here is it's just a spotlight with an image texture actually as the source of light. So I'll just show you what I mean here. So actually I took a picture just on my phone. There was some light, the sun like coming through the door, and it was hitting the wall next to it and creating this just interesting pattern on the wall. So I just took a picture of that, and I'm actually running that through this light here. So the main one is just doing this, where it's just kind of or actually that's not even the main one. There's kind of a bunch of them stacked on top of each other. One is affecting the volume and one is not. But you can see this creates a really interesting setup, and you can actually just swap the image for a bunch of different things. So I was trying out a bunch of weird images. So like this is a random download from Unsplash of just like this thing, and you can see this can give you some really just crazy lighting if you throw the right image in here. So that's a bit too much. That's too extreme for what I want here, but I'm using the same technique with just something a bit more simple with, you know, just a kind of nice refraction that's coming from the wall. Okay, I'll just show you how to set this up really quick in a new file. So I'll just add some objects in here just for a quick demo scene. So I'll add a spotlight for this. It works with an area light and a point light too, but I'll just do it with a spotlight. And for the different light sources, by the way, you might have to adjust the actual radius of the light to get it to work. So just be careful with that. Or with an area light, you have to adjust the spread. Just be careful if you're going to use that, but it's all kind of the same. So spotlight in, just go to render view here. Let's take the background way down, and I'll just go to the object in the shader editor, the object settings, and then just for this light here, we're in the shader editor. You just need to click this button up here, use nodes, click that. Now this emission node will actually affect the strength, but this one will affect the strength as well. So if you adjust it over here, so I set this to whatever number, that's actually one influence on the light. Same with the color. So if I make it a bit blue, that's one influence. This emission node kind of acts as a second influence. So if I adjust the strength, it adjusts it there as well. And if I make the color like a different color, it's going to also interact with it. And they are both kind of fighting with each other. So if I make both of them kind of extreme colors, they'll both kind of combine into one output. So it's a bit weird, but it works. So anyways, what I want to do here is just, I'll keep those both on white. I'll just go and find an image to drop in here. So again, I just took this picture on my phone of just some cool light coming through the door and then hitting the wall. So I'll plug that image, just drop it in there, plug it into the color, and you can see it's straight away working. So you just have to kind of angle this how you'd want. I'm going to rotate this on the local Z, so it's just RZ and then Z one more time so that this can spin kind of on its axis like this. Kind of position it like that. Let's maybe just bring up that strength a bit, so I'll just set this to a bit higher. I can also increase the radius of the light a little bit, so I'm kind of getting the texture of the wall coming through. So if I want to blur that a little bit, I can just increase the radius of the light, and that's probably going to make it feel a bit more natural as well. If you go too high, that image won't be visible anymore, but just increasing that a little bit is probably a good idea. And then I can tint this whatever color I want. So if I want to make it like a bit blue, I can do that. Maybe let's bring the radius back down a little bit there. And then what I might want to do also is run the color of this into the strength of this node. What that's going to do is it's going to make the strength actually lower in the darker areas. And I can actually use like a color ramp or curves or something. Sorry, color ramp. Clicking the wrong thing. Okay, color ramp in there, and then I can adjust exactly where this falls off. I probably want to set this to like ease or B-spline just to get a smoother fall off, but that works there. I could take a math node and multiply the strength up here if I want to do that. But yeah, that's the first setup for just some really interesting kind of textures you can get coming through there. And then I'll just increase the blend a bit, and then the spot size will kind of just do this. So one thing I did in mind is I just added a hue saturation value node, increase the saturation on that, and then just kind of get that in combination with a different color here and balance it out. And then you're kind of getting the rainbow kind of splitting happening there a bit more clearly. So it's a really fun way to do this. And then you can duplicate this as many times as you need, rotate it, different ways. So I'll just kind of do that. And you can get some pretty interesting lighting like this. And this also works for area lights or point lights. So for example, if I just take this, I can just switch it over to point. And then if I just kind of have this in here, you can see from a point light, it's actually doing the exact same thing. And that can create some really interesting results as well if you kind of have this in the middle. One thing I'll do sometimes is put like a water image into this, and that'll give you some caustics, like fake looking caustics that you can just output from there. And you can animate this with like a noise texture or whatever. I have a video on that I can link below. So another video I did on water a while ago, but yeah, you can get some really crazy just lighting like this. And it usually works better in combination with something else. So you might want to have something that's more normal and then kind of have this just in combination somewhere else in the scene, a bit lighter. And then that could just be like a nice complement to the actual lighting that you have that's a bit more, of a traditional normal setup with like a spotlight or something. Same thing with an area light. If I just point this down, you do have to decrease the spread all the way down though. So I'll just bring that to 0, increase the size, and then you can get the same exact sort of pattern here. So yeah, that's the exact setup that I used in this one here. And I just duplicated the light a couple more times, but it's the exact same setup I just showed. Here's another example where I use this technique in this one. It's actually the same image. So if I hide the main light source, you can see that it's actually, that same image is actually running in here. If I bring the main light back in, it's kind of making that a bit more subtle, but it's the same thing running through there. And then you can see there's that same image, kind of just creating some interesting highlights in the scene, making it a bit more interesting overall. Okay, the next technique is using lighting gobos, which basically just means some sort of surface that's blocking some of the light to cast interesting shadows onto the scene. So here's an example of that. In this scene, if you pay attention to the beams of light at the top, we'll get to actual God rays later on, but this is sort of a different method. This stuff at the top, so the light is here, right? This is the light. There's basically just one main light. It's actually going through these two planes right here, which are, I actually have an image of like paint or something on there. You can use a noise texture. I'll show you how to set this up in a second, but basically just some sort of plane with something running into the alpha, and that will create these really interesting like shadow casting things, which will then kind of like cast more beams of light down onto the scene. And that's where, if we look at this from the top down, if I just hide these two planes, instead of the whole thing just being fully covered in the same neutral level of light all the way through, when you do this and you create some interesting shadows, we're blocking out some of the lights and like letting it through in like bright little patches, and it just creates a more interesting look sometimes. So I don't always do this, but it's just a fun technique you can do sometimes to create just more cool lighting, especially if the lighting just feels off or boring. Like I'm happy with the direction in this case, but it's just something is missing and it's just not quite ready or there. So doing this is, I feel like, just making it more finalized and just cool. So yeah, here's how to do this. I'll just show you how to set this up right now. Okay, so for this method, I'll use the spotlight as well, just for an example, but this works with anything. You can work with a sun lamp, area light, doesn't matter. So we'll add a light, spotlight, just to make it easy. Go to render view and take the background way down. Let's make this a bit brighter, I guess a lot brighter. And just kind of move it up so it's covering this sort of general area. Let's make it even brighter, just like whatever. I'll make the radius a bit bigger than 0 because we don't want a radius of 0 meters. That's impossible. So we'll just increase that a bit. I'll increase the blend so it's a bit smoother, and we'll just start with that. Okay, so let's actually add a plane in here. So Shift A, mesh plane, and I want to just kind of bring this up and cover where I want to cast a shadow over basically everything. So wherever there's light, I want to fully block it out with this plane. So kind of like that. And then on this plane, I'm just going to go to the shader editor object on the shader editor there, and then we'll make a new material. So basically what the alpha is going to do is an alpha of, if the alpha is at 1, right, it's going to be fully opaque, just regular, not transparent at all. As you lower this down, it's going to be more and more transparent, all the way to where it's fully invisible at 0. So what I want to do is take like a noise texture or an image texture or just something with variation, and I'm gonna plug that into the alpha. Okay, so right away it doesn't seem like it's doing that much, and that's because this noise is really low contrast. So if I take a color ramp and I just increase the contrast of this noise, then you'll start to see what we're gonna get some like patches of interesting light here. So the first thing is we have to lower this down so that this becomes opaque enough that it actually starts casting some shadows below. And we have to have it like this high enough so it's not just fully dark. So just increasing the contrast like that is usually what I'll start with. And then I'll just usually increase the detail and roughness a little bit. So now notice I want this to be a bit more harsh, but no matter how harsh I make this plane here, it's still like really soft shadows down below. So the distance of the light from the plane as well as the radius of the light are both going to have an effect on how crisp and sharp this is. So you probably don't want it to be really, really crisp and sharp, like hard light coming through this. It's just going to look weird if you have this kind of setup. Could be interesting in like an artistic, abstract way, but most of the time you'll want to increase the radius, like the actual size of the light itself, and that's going to help soften out the shadows. And you don't usually want to be able to tell what this blocker is. So sometimes you do if you want to use like an image of leaves or something, or like an actual tree in there, that can work. But for just a situation like this where you just want some general kind of interesting shadows, you probably want to keep it relatively soft, and that'll lead to the most pleasing kind of natural looking results. Sometimes what I'll do as well is just take some weird image I downloaded. So like I'll take some image of tiles or something that I got from, I think this is just from Unsplash, and I'll just drop that into the shader editor and plug that into this. Then you can do something like, let's just unwrap the plane. So just unwrap cube projection, and then we can just, let's just do that again so it does it properly. We can just kind of scale this to whatever, and then I'll adjust the radius of this light so that you can see if it's 0, that's going to be way too harsh. Interesting, but too harsh. But you can get some really like unique looking lighting if you kind of just throw in some random image. This I wouldn't use exactly how it is, but just could be a good starting point for like getting some ideas for some interesting lighting. One thing I will usually do is take this plane image and then just shift select the light, hit Control P to parent it, and then just choose Object Keep Transform. So Control P and then K for Keep Transform. Then when you move the light around, it's just gonna, that plane is gonna follow it. So this could lead to some really interesting stuff, like, you know, if you start making this weird colors and make it really bright or whatever, like you can do some weird stuff with this. And it doesn't have to be this extreme too, like it can be a bit more soft. But yeah, sometimes just throwing random images in here, stuff that you wouldn't expect would work. Sometimes it looks really cool. So I'll just try like, I don't know. I think I have some like patterns of some like nature kind of stuff. I'll do like an image of ice or something. Just weird stuff that you would not expect or be able to really make on your own. Sometimes it looks really interesting. So I don't know. It can just give you some cool results that you wouldn't expect sometimes. You can also combine this with the first technique if you want to use like an image in the actual light source itself. So I could just drop in like this, run that into here, and then we're just going to get some like really ridiculous stuff going on. I don't even know what's happening here, but you get the point, right? You can just combine this together and get some really interesting results. And then that just kind of over the entire scene sometimes is enough to just make the lighting really interesting. Okay, let's go to the next technique. Okay, the next technique is God rays, and I'll just show you how to set this up. We'll use the same example demo file here. The only thing you have to do differently here is just add some volume. So if I just add a cube in here, and I'll show you the settings to make sure that this works every time, because sometimes people get confused with this. So I'll add a cube over the entire scene, delete the principled shader, add a volume scatter node plug that to the volume, lower the density since it's just a brick right now. It's way too high. So we'll just lower that down to like 0.02, 0.03, somewhere around there to start. And we have some volume now. Okay. So the way this works is, the way you get God rays is if you have really hard light, I'll explain what that means in a second, going through some sort of pattern or getting cast through like leaves or something that's creating really harsh shadows, going through volume. So you need something that's, first of all, creating shadows. So this technique works for that. So I'll just kind of ramp up the contrast of this to make this really, really clear. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is you need hard light. And by hard light, I mean a small light source that is not soft. So a light source which is soft is going to be a big radius like this. And that's going to create really soft shadows. If you look at the cube, the shadows are, this would be like really hard shadows where it's a really defined line coming off of this cube. Really soft shadows are going to be more of a blurred line on there. So you need hard light. And that's just going to be a small radius on the light source, just like that. So it doesn't need to be 0, but it needs to be relatively small. And that's how you're going to get this sort of effect there. And different blockers will kind of work better here. So if I choose like something else, it's probably going to give me a different or more interesting result. Sometimes what I'll do as well is just throw a model of like a tree in here. So if I just spawn in some random tree from Botanic, I'll just do like this or whatever. Let's delete that other plane. I'll just hide that for a sec. And I'll just kind of block this with a tree. And let's make this a bit brighter as well. And you can see like something like this will give you kind of a God ray setup. And obviously you'll have to adjust the scale based on the scene. But you can see you can very easily get a setup like this with just like a small light and then a tree or some image that's casting a shadow, like some plane. And that's going to give you like that'll give you God rays every time if you just have a small light source and then some sort of complex shadow going through volume. That's how you do that. If you don't see it, like you're just not getting what you want, just try and reduce the radius of the light. And the smaller you make it, the closer you're going to get to just like this. You probably don't want to do 0, like I said, because it's just too extreme, but somewhere around there is going to be nice. Okay, the next trick I want to show you is fake bounce lighting when there's just not enough of that happening naturally in the scene. So you got to be careful with this because it can really make an environment look unnatural because you're doing something that is not how light actually behaves here. But let me just show you what I mean. So in this case, I was happy with the lighting, how it was here. The problem is I'm getting this really big section of really dark shadow, which I just thought was overkill. But I didn't want to move the light around because I was happy with the rest of the lighting all around the scene. It was just this one area I didn't like. So what I did was I just added a point light in there. Seems like it doesn't make a big difference, but when you render it out and you actually add post-processing, it really does enhance the vibe and really make it look quite a lot different. And it brings out details that you wouldn't see. Like there's all these pillars and stuff in here that I'm just brightening up a little bit with this fake bounce lighting. So what this is, it's just a point light. This I happen to be using the nodes in here, like the first technique. You don't have to do that. You can just use a regular default point light. And it's really just not doing much in here anyways. The key here is you want to have a large radius so it's fairly soft, because what you're simulating here, right, is light coming from the main light source, so like this spotlight, coming down, hitting a surface, so like the floor down here, and then bouncing back up onto some other surface. So it's kind of like you're simulating light bouncing off of like the floor and coming up, hitting some surface here, right? So what you want to do is like the floor is essentially already acting kind of as a second light source, where it's just kind of like a big, like I'll show you what I mean here. If I add a plane in here, just a white plane, this is actually acting as the same thing, where it's just a big white surface is going to be reflecting tons of light off of it. And you can see on this thing here, if I show and hide this plane, it's reflecting light almost as if it was its own light source. So that's actually happening already in the scene. It's just that these other objects aren't full white and they're not really bouncing off that much light. So one thing you can do is actually just brighten up like the floor or something, and that'll have the same effect. But if you don't want to do that and you want to just fake it, you could just add in a point light and just put it in or ordinary light too, but just put it in the rough area where there's already light bouncing off. And the key here to making it not look fake and making it look real is you want to do it in an area where there is already a bunch of bounce lighting, but it's just maybe not enough. So there's definitely some bounce lighting happening off of this floor down here. There's lots of light hitting this area. So if I put a point light in that rough area, increase the radius so it's nice and a big soft light source, just like the floor down here would be. Then start increasing this. Then it'll feel a lot more natural. Where this doesn't work is if you have it in an area that just makes no sense where there would be bounce lighting. So if there wasn't a big patch of light here, or if this was like over here or something, that's where you get that kind of fake look where there's just a random light casting light out of nowhere with no apparent source. That's where it gets weird and just bad and fake. So avoid that. The other thing is you probably want to color match this. So I noticed that the light hitting the floor here is kind of like blue. So I'm just going to make the light a bit more kind of a bluish, greenish kind of color. Not overkill, like not too saturated, but just a little bit. And then when I put that kind of in this rough area, that looks fairly natural, you know? And it helps bring out all those details in there. Now, one thing you can do if you're getting kind of like a glow from the volume, if you're using volumetrics and it's just kind of glowing weirdly, first of all, turn off multiple importance if you're getting like weird reflections. So that's the first thing. The second thing is go into this orange square tab, go down to visibility and then ray visibility down here. Turn off volume scatter for this light. And that will make it so that it's not like if I make the radius really small here, you'll probably be able to see this better. Like you can see we're just getting this weird like glow from the volume. It's just like you just don't want that. So I'm just gonna go in here, turn off the volume scatter, and then you just don't get any of that at all. Make the radius a bit bigger, and that's gonna be like the most natural way to include this in here. This is too bright at 1,000. Usually I'll keep this at like 100-ish, just really, really subtle. And usually less is more. If you go too high, it's just gonna ruin it. But that can be a really nice way to just add that kind of special bounce lighting look to your renders. It's something I do a lot, and as long as you don't go too far with it, it can really make things look a lot nicer. Okay, the next technique, which is a new feature, you might have seen this already, but here I am with an example using it in actually client work. So I'll show you how I actually use this in a render, is the light fall off node, where you can get a gradient fall off of like a different color at the start of the light versus where it kind of falls off. So what I mean is like this, right? These lights here are red at the start, and as the light gets further away from the light source, it actually turns into like bluish, purplish light that's being emitted. So if I move this around, you can see it's actually red up close and then like blue as it gets further from the light source. And that'll like change over the distance. You can adjust it all here. This is a client work for Res and Virtual Riot. So Virtual Riot has like a kind of blue and purple pinkish kind of color scheme. Res has a very red sort of color scheme, and I was really having a hard time like balancing all those three things together. It was really a little bit stressful on this one, but anyways, the point is I was stressing, and I found this was like a really good solution to get a nice balance of these two colors, where it's like if I hide this, you'll see what I mean, right? If I take this away, this is just like not nice at all, this weird red emission from these three like light bars here. But when I bring in these point lights, it's all of a sudden creating this really interesting kind of like just nice feeling glow around this thing, where it's like warmth and red, but it's concentrated and very controlled. So obviously you got to be careful with this and don't go too crazy with it. It can really make it look super unnatural. But if you can like tweak around with it and balance it in a way that feels nice, you can get some really interesting and just cool, unique lighting with this technique here. So here's how you set this up from scratch. We'll just make a new file really quick. Okay, so I'll just add a plane for a floor, get some objects in here, and we'll just start here. So I'm gonna add a point light for this, but it works with any light source. So point light, and we'll just go to render view, make this darker. Okay, let's go to the object settings. And for that point light there, I'm just gonna hit use nodes in the shader editor. So let's get the light fall off node, and we'll just plug that into the color. Okay, so I was using linear on that one, but you can use, I think, any of these. linear or quadratic. I don't actually know what constant does, but we'll just start with linear because it's going to be probably the easiest. And let's turn down the strength of that till it gets to kind of like a more normal looking strength. Then let's take a color ramp and run that through there. So we're plugging this light fall off through a color ramp into the emission color of the light. So if I said, I can actually just go in here and set these colors to whatever. So if I make this like blue and I make this one like red, it is working, but the range is just not in the right spot here. So if I just start adjusting the strength, we should like find a section of this strength slider where it kind of like transitions from one color to the other. So I'm going to just move it around until it's kind of in between there. Let's increase the strength of this a bit. And you can see now it's working. So the light up close is actually like blue. And then as you get further away, it gets more red. So this is a really interesting technique where it's like, it's not something that's possible in real life. And this is where it's kind of like fun to be able to run experiments like this in Blender with just crazy situations like this. But you can get some really cool stuff like this. So I might want to flip this around where it's like warm at the start and then kind of fades off into something cool. Another trick you might have seen is you can switch this RGB color mode here actually to like HSV or HSL, and that'll actually run through the entire color spectrum. So it'll be like if I just crank this to like something over here and make this like, you know, I don't know, something crazy. So what it's doing is it's kind of, instead of transitioning with like a weird, just going straight from one color to the other, it's kind of running across the entire spectrum and picking up any color that it runs into. So that can be a really just weird, trippy result you get, but I usually don't like doing that. I usually just keep it on RGB. And then, yeah, you can get, I kind of like having something warm at the start and then fading off into something cool, but you can do whatever you want here. And you could probably actually combine this with all the other techniques. So let me try and like bring an image texture in here and just see what that does. Okay, so I'm just bringing in that texture of, or that image of water caustics using a mix RGB node set to multiply, and then that's just going in here. And then you can see if you combine these things together, you can just do some wild stuff. Like this is just super weird, crazy lighting, but yeah, I mean, that's funny. Oh my God. Okay. But yeah, you get the point. And then you can combine this with lighting gobos too. Like you can combine all this stuff together into one technique or into like one scene if you want, right? So, that's fun. Okay, that's it for this one. Thank you for watching. Go and check out the new Cyber Environments course if you are interested in the newest course that I have for cyberpunk renders. Other than that, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.